Well, why? Yeah, so just to give you a fair warning, this is Port Adelaide's review, and there's going to be a lot of frustration in this one. So, Port Adelaide have kind of continued their recent trend of having some really inconsistent seasons where they probably should be performing better than they have been, and 2019 was really no exception to that kind of rule that they're generating for themselves. They had a year that was like really based on patterns where they would win 2, lose 2, win 1, lose 1, and it would go on throughout the entire season right up until about the last month of the season where things just kind of went away from the pattern. But Port Adelaide have been a very, very inconsistent side for a team that probably should be vying for a top 4 position given its list, and it's just not. So it's my job to have a look at what happened throughout the year for Port Adelaide. But before we do, we have to have a look at where they were coming from coming into the year. So that means we've got to have a brief look at their 2018 campaign and what their expectations were coming into 2019. So Port Adelaide in 2018 finished with 12 wins, 10 losses, and a percentage of 107.6%. However, it wasn't as cut and dry as you may think. They actually started the year on absolute fire, being in the top 4 at the halfway point of the year, and then just completely capitulated in the back half of the year and only won like 2 games for the rest of the year and fell out of the top 8. It was a season that they kind of shot themselves in the foot by just not playing up to their earlier season standards. So the expectations coming into 2019 for the most part was that Port Adelaide was a team to be making finals at the very least, but one of those teams that were trying to vie for a top 4 spot. At least that was the general consensus for their year. And to be perfectly honest, the messaging that was coming out of the club was of that same ilk. It makes it all the more interesting when you see that Port Adelaide's 2019, at least from a statistical point of view with regards to their win-loss, was actually worse. It's not always as easy to look at the stats and just go, hey, that's a good year, that's a bad year, and everything like that. Like I said, in 2018, their season completely capitulated in the back half to the point where 2018 was actually a really disappointing year, whereas 2019 felt kind of different. Boak had a absolutely fantastic year, but Wines had a really poor year. New recruit Rosie was in the conversation of being one of the best first-year players in last year's draft. Why they dropped Lysette is anyone's guess. To bring in Ryder, who had absolutely no impact on any of the games he played at any stage throughout the year. It's just perplexing to me. They keep saying the right messaging towards members and towards the public that they want to be playing finals this year and everything, but it doesn't look like everything is lined up for them to be able to do so. So there's a bit of discourse running through the club at the moment. So let's have a look at that 2019 season, break it down and see how it panned out to end up the way that they did. So Port Adelaide opened up their first 2 weeks of the year in pretty good form. They won their first 2 games against the likes of Melbourne and Carlton. Melbourne, who finished in the prelim the year before, was actually a good win for the club to start off its year. Unfortunately, we know what actually happened with Melbourne for the rest of the year, so on retrospect it doesn't look like a good win, but at the time it was a very good win for Port Adelaide to start their season off with a bang. Port Adelaide got up and they were 2-0 coming into the start of the year. It's a fantastic start for a team that wants to play finals, and it's a really good building platform to go from there. However, as will be the running theme of the season that is Port Adelaide, they went on to lose their next 2 matches. The first one against Brisbane up at the Gabba, which is where Brisbane was kind of starting to put together its season to actually play finals again. But Port Adelaide fell away pretty horribly, and it was actually considered a very bad loss for Port Adelaide in a game that they probably felt like they should have won. They were in the game for most of the match, and then just kind of fell away towards the end of it. And it was a bit disappointing for them considering their start to the year. The following week was against Richmond at home. The game was actually quite even. Port Adelaide were in it the entire time. It was a very close margin. I don't think the margin exceeded like 3 goals throughout the entire day. However, it was just right at the very last sort of 2 minutes that Port Adelaide let a goal go through and they couldn't get it back. It put them more than a goal out of winnings range, and Port Adelaide would go on to lose the game. It was a very deflating kind of loss for Port Adelaide because it felt like they were really in the fight and everything, and Richmond had been kind of struggling a little bit to find some good consistent form, and they came out and they won this game, and it was actually a really good win for the Tigers and a really sour loss for Port Adelaide. However, round 5 was actually a really good response from Port Adelaide to the Richmond loss, as they went over to the West and played the reigning premiers. No one actually gave them a hope that they would be able to come up in this game. Port Adelaide came in with a game plan to just push the ball forward at any cost, put in the chaos ball into the forward line so that the West Coast setup is set up for the high trajectory, bomb it into the forward line kind of ball, which most teams actually do because of the pressure up the ground. However, Port Adelaide didn't allow that pressure to dictate what kind of entry would be going into the forward 50. All of their forward 50 entries were pretty much along the ground. They came in with a plan, used the ground, used their pace, and it worked to perfection against West Coast. And they beat West Coast to the tune of 42 points. They absolutely smacked them, actually, and put Port Adelaide back into the equation of playing finals football, as it was such a good win and it was such a well orchestrated win for Port Adelaide that anything kind of seemed possible from there. And it only carried on into the following week where they came up against North Melbourne. Now, North Melbourne at this point in the year were not going very well at all. So a win was expected of Port Adelaide, and that's exactly what happened. They won to the tune of 16 points. Not a big win, but a win nonetheless. And it carried them into the opening 6 rounds as a 4-2 ledger, which is a pretty good opening season. However, as I said before, their season was a season of patterns, and 2 wins and then 2 losses would only really negate the fact that next week had to be a loss, and well, that's kind of what happened. Port Adelaide conceded the first 7 goals of the game. However, they kicked like 3 behinds themselves, and then the score kind of remained even from there. It was that opening quarter that cost Port Adelaide the game. They never really drew back the margin after 3/4 time. However, they never let that margin blow out any further than that either. It was a really close, it was a really actually great entertaining game after the first quarter. It makes the following week all the more harder for Port Adelaide, because instead of playing 3 good quarters of football and 1 poor one like they did against the Magpies, they played 3 shocking ones and 1 blistering one against the Crows in the showdown, which was their home game. To put it into perspective, Port Adelaide only kicked 3 goals in the opening 3 quarters. That is atrocious by any counter that you go by. This is what Port Adelaide were like throughout this year. They just lacked that consistency. They lacked that mental toughness, that mental edge to be able to actually string together consistent performances throughout just even the same game, let alone weeks on weeks. Yeah, I'll moving along. I'm getting really frustrated. So after another 2 losses, they were due a win, and wouldn't you know it, it came against the Suns at home. Of course, the Suns were going to lose this game. There was never any doubt that they were going to lose this game, and the Power beat them by 38 points. Well, the following week, they come up against Hawthorn, and judging by past patterns, they should win this game, but they don't. They throw inconsistency into their inconsistent ways and break the pattern. You had a good thing going, Port Adelaide. Come on. So yeah, they lost to the Hawks by 31 points. They kind of got completely outplayed for pretty much the entire day. Port only managed to kick 6 goals for the day, which as an AFL team You just can't be doing that and expect to win games. They kicked 6 goals and 13 behinds. That is, for lack of a better word, sucky. That's the word I'm going with. I'm sticking with it. You can deal with it. So, they lose to the Hawks. The following week, they play their game in China against St Kilda. Port Adelaide hasn't lost a game in China yet. And this week is no exception. In fact, they put St Kilda to the sword. They put them down. They dug a grave. They stole the MH380 plane, and I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. They beat the Saints by 70 points. They absolutely demolished the Saints. If it wasn't for Geelong being the absolute worst team in the entire competition since the history of the byes, coming out of a bye and actually pretty much never winning, Port Adelaide would hold that mantle because they do the exact same thing every year. They don't win after the bye. Wouldn't you know it? The week following the bye, they play Fremantle in Perth and get smashed. Okay, well, they didn't get smashed. They lost by 21 points, but they were convincingly defeated by Fremantle, specifically in the last quarter. The game was actually very close, even just halfway through the last quarter, and then all of a sudden, bang, 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 bang. Fremantle pile on like 4 goals in a row and just completely put the game to bed. I don't know. I guess they just don't like having time off from footy or something, but they don't like winning after the bye. Wait. You'll have noticed something already, maybe, because I did mention it at the start of the video. This season is a season of patterns, right? So their first 8 weeks was win-win, loss-loss. Win-win, loss-loss. Win-win, loss-loss. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed that they've had a loss, they've had a win. They've had a loss, they've had a win. They just had a loss against Fremantle, so what do you think's coming up next? Yeah, you guessed it. They had a win. In fact, it wasn't just any win, it was a really good win against Geelong, who were at this stage 2 games clear on top of the ladder. That just put a bit more belief, put a bit more hope back into their season that they could actually finish finals. Now, they were never out of the equation of finals at pretty much any stage of the year, but they were never really convincing throughout any part of the year that they would actually play finals either. So a win against the top of the ladder was a very convincing win in just trying to convince people and perhaps even the club themselves that they were a genuine chance at actually making a push for the finals. And a win like this is a really good launching pad. But this wouldn't be Port Adelaide if they didn't follow up a win with a loss to the Bulldogs at home by 25 points. So I don't really have anything positive to say about this game. The Dogs were probably just going at about this stage. In fact, this is probably the win for the Dogs that actually kick-started their run into the finals. I mean, you could really see this club as being the charity of the club. I mean, if you go back through their history, they have Gold Coast their first win. That's a really nice charitable thing to do. Good on you, Port Adelaide, for giving yourself that one. They in 2017 they choked an elimination final. In fact, they gave one of the best finals games of history, but they gave it to West Coast. So thank you again for that, Port Adelaide. It's very, very charitable. Yeah, this club, it's a really frustrating club. You would not believe what happens next. Okay, it's the Crows' home game for the showdown this time. And Port Adelaide won. What? Get out. No, that's a surprisingly huge shock. Why is it that they can only play like this every second week or every now and again against some good teams that are potentially better than them? It boggles my mind that Port Adelaide can just ride the waves of emotion. And this, don't get me wrong, this team is a team that plays on emotion. It's probably the only team in the competition that relies on playing on emotion. If they don't play with some kind of emotion within the game where the media is hunting them or they have something to say, they have something to prove, so they come out and they fire, and they really fire. At Port Adelaide's best, Port Adelaide are a team that can beat any other team in the competition, right? But their best just never comes and shows up, especially when they're expected to win a game. And that's what's most frustrating about Port Adelaide, especially in 2019. They lost a lot of games that they should have won, and then they go on to win a lot of games that they should have lost. It doesn't make sense. Why? Port Adelaide, right? Guys, come on. Just hear me out. On your home deck, you should be winning most of the games that you play. However, there is a bit of a theme with this team and subverting expectations. They have had 8 home games, and their ledger sits at 4 wins, 4 losses when playing at home. Yeah, not a good sign, and that's kind of really all you need to look into this team. If you're not winning most of your home games, you're not playing finals. You only need to look at every other interstate team in the competition, and they're not a bad team. We saw that. In fact, we saw that against Adelaide. We saw that against Geelong. We saw that against West Coast. So why can't we see it at home? Now, I did say at the start that the year for Port Adelaide was a year of patterns. 2 wins, 2 losses, 2 wins, 2 losses, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss sort of thing. And it wasn't until around about the last month of footy that they started to break that pattern. So on the back of a loss, you'd think that they would come back and then have a win. However, that's not going to happen anymore because we're coming into the final months or thereabouts of the home and away season. And of course, Port Adelaide have got to throw a wrench into their consistently inconsistent ways and be inconsistent about being consistent. And yes, of course, they go on to lose to the Tigers at the MCG. They get thumped by the Tigers, actually. And to make matters worse, the following week, at home, again, might I mention, they lose again to GWS to the tune of 1 point. They've lost 3 in a row now. Perhaps they can create a new pattern in the back end of the year and win 3 in a row, right? Just symmetry's sake, right? That'd be a good way to finish the year. And in fact, they do win the next game against the Bombers away from home. 19 goals they kicked, 126 points in total they kicked. It's the 3rd time for the year that they've scored over 100 points. For consistency's sake, we want to bank on them having a win for the following week, right? To try and get to that 3-win ledger, patterns and everything. And hey, guess what? They do that. They play at home against Sydney and they managed to win, which was actually quite surprising. This game was kind of touted to be a much closer affair. However, Port Adelaide would actually come out and fire after half time and blow the margin out. 47 points they win by at home, in a game that they actually managed to play 4 quarters for. It was amazing. They got a really good boost to their percentage. This win, I believe, actually put them in 8th position. Port Adelaide looked kind of likely to make finals, and it was brilliant. So the week before, Port kicked over 100 points against, the 4th time they've done so for the year. And then they kick 58 points. Yeah, so I'm not going to touch that game. It speaks for itself. And it really just sums up Port Adelaide for 2019. Port Adelaide gave themselves, at least in the last round, the best chance to make finals. They beat the Dockers by 43 points, put their percentage back up a little bit, considering the huge dent they just took the week prior. But results didn't go their way. They didn't end up making finals. They finished the year on 11 wins, 11 losses. In my personal opinion, Ken Hinkley is not the man to lead Port Adelaide to, glory. Pretty much every single player on this list, except for maybe Travis Boak, relied on the young players carrying them. That is not a good sign. Ollie Wines had a particularly poor year. Paddy Ryder is cooked. He needs to go. Really questionable selection issues with Lysette in the back half of the year. He was probably one of the best players for Port Adelaide throughout the entire year. He was actually probably one of the best ruckmen in the competition for the year. And they inexplicably dropped him for Ryder and Adams to come in. Ryder was an inexcusable inclusion, especially considering he was given like 3 or 4 weeks to try and establish himself back in the team, and at no stage looked even remotely likely at getting any form about him. Their game plan looks lost. They actually don't have a solid game plan. It changes from week to week. Now, whether that's just a lack of, the young players that this team relies so heavily on, just not having that ingrained foundation of the game plan in them yet, that may be a cause and effect of why they would score really heavily or get completely blown out in pretty much every match this year. But it never actually appeared like Port Adelaide had a solid game plan throughout the year. And from a coach who's been in the head coach role now for over half a decade, and to not have a solid, identifiable game plan in place is just unquestionable. So how do I rate Port Adelaide's year? Well, to be perfectly honest, the expectations coming into the year was that they definitely make finals and they should be pushing for a top 4 spot, but probably actually finish about 5th or 6th or something around there. They ended up falling away from that expectation. In fact, as the year went on, their expectation just kept getting lower and lower, to the point where it was just get 8th spot then, which wasn't going to happen after their loss to North Melbourne. They kind of shot themselves in the foot there. The ranking I'm going to give Port Adelaide is a D. So let me know what you think of my review in the comments below. This is actually the first one that I've done without a script to read off, so it's a bit more flowing, I feel. Hopefully it was a bit more entertaining for you to watch, because I'm not constantly looking away and stuff like that. By all means, join our Discord. The link will be in the description below. We still do have more reviews coming next week. Thank you for watching the video. If you did like it, make sure you leave a thumbs up. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell to receive notifications when we come out with new content. And I will see you next time. Bye.